This is Ballot Vox, the Pointers look at the issues on the ballot in Peel, in Niagara, at Queen's Park, and in Ottawa. Now, your host, Joel Whitnable.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Ballot Vox for 2024. Today, we're going to be talking about the appointment of Bill 40 as the new chief of the Niagara Regional Police and the hope and concern it has triggered among community members. 40 was previously a deputy chief for the NRPS since 2017 and has more than 3 decades of policing experience. His CV includes time as an assistant commissioner for the RCMP in Lower Mainland, BC, and police work in the incredibly diverse location, particularly Surrey, BC. Since joining the Niagara Police, the service says he has been instrumental in the development of 2 strategic plans, documents that outline priorities for the future and guide decision-making for the force, as well as the creation of a mental health strategy and diversity plan. It's a level of experience crucial for someone stepping into the role of leading a police service in such a dynamic place as Niagara Region. But the appointment has also drawn concern from members of the public and advocacy organizations, particularly those representing Niagara's diverse communities. The disdain stems from comments Chief 40 made in 2020 when, during a radio interview, he stated that systemic racism was not an issue for the NRPS. To be fair to the chief, in a statement provided to the Pointer this week, he has clarified those statements, and I quote directly from him now. During my journey of self-reflection, I have since acknowledged both inside and outside our police service on numerous occasions that within the institution of policing there are systemic barriers that exist and that I have had privileges that others have not simply by being a white male. To discuss the appointment of the new chief today and the relationship between the NRPS and Niagara's diverse communities, with me today is Saleh Waziruddin and Erika Smith with the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association. Saleh, Erika, thanks so much to both of you for being here to talk about this important appointment in Niagara.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Excellent. So to start off, I want both of your opinions and your thoughts on this question. But Saleh, I'll start with you. The press release from your organization, the NRARA, makes it clear that the organization is not impressed with the appointment of Chief 40. But hearing his statement now that he provided the Pointer, and I'm sure you've read the Pointer's coverage in the story that came out yesterday, does that ease any of the concern for you?
Absolutely not. If he's done this growth and reflection, then why can't he admit that there is systemic racism in the Niagara Regional Police Service? Because what he said is the same thing he said 4 years ago. There's systemic racism in policing. There's systemic racism everywhere else on the world, except somehow the Niagara Regional Police Service is an exception. He won't say that there's systemic racism in there. And 4 years ago, he said there's no evidence to show that. But their own reports, the police's own reports, that they write for their board, that they're required to write, have that evidence, like the stats when they do racial profiling, or now thanks to the 2017 Ontario Anti-Racism Act, we know that their disparity in how disproportionately they use force against Black and also Middle Eastern Latino people is way off of not only the population but what other police forces do. So that evidence has been there, and at that time he said there's no evidence. So now why won't he say that, yes, we do have evidence that there's systemic racism, and yes, there is systemic racism in the Niagara Region Police Service? Because the police forces right next door, Hamilton, Peel, Toronto, they've said that. The Toronto police chief apologized to the Black community for the disproportional violent use of force against Black people. And before he did that, he even told his officers to brace themselves. In Niagara, we have the opposite. Our outgoing chief patted the police on the back, themselves on the back, saying that they're very conservative and very restrained in their use of force. And white people in power have just eaten it up, just believe whatever the police is saying, even though their own evidence and own reports show that it's actually worse in Niagara than the places around that admit it.
And Erika, what about you? What are your thoughts on his statements and what it means going forward?
Yeah, I would echo everything that Saleh has just said, in that I feel like 40 speaks around the issue of systemic racism and even racism within the NRPS. It's problematic because the Black community, marginalized people, it's affecting their lives. and the way that they are being supported, or a lack of support that they experience within the region. I say that because as the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association, we have people who come to us when the police have been ineffective with helping them, when they're experiencing a hate crime, when they're in a time of need. And the response from the NRPS has not been adequate. So whether he wants to admit that there is systemic racism or the existence of racism within the NRPS, there's certainly a lack of response from them when the community calls on them in their time of need. For instance, I have somebody who I'm close with who called the NRPS when they were experiencing a hate crime, and they were told basically, what do you want us to do about it? And it's not okay when somebody is in that place where they're needing help. And if you go on to the report hate crimes, the website that the NRPS has, it's a system to intake, but not to actually act on what people are saying they need help with. She's been told that yes, what can I do? And then even a Black police officer went out and said, okay, so what? I've been called the N-word before. What do you want me to do about it? And when you're confronted with something like that, where else do you turn? And so they turn to the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association for help, for support. And it shouldn't come to that. As much as we are here to support our community members, we need a police chief who recognizes that racism and systemic racism exist within their own institution, within their organization specifically, and have the tools and the strategies put together to actually help our community members and to be able to train their police officers to do something more than just be a presence, to actually help people when they're experiencing hate crimes and racism.
Yeah, Erika, a lot of what you just said, I think I do want to get back to, because it looks at where the police service in Niagara needs to go moving forward. But with the chief, before we move on to the bigger themes, I do want to just, is this a matter, Saleh, you made this, abundantly clear. It seems in his statement that he could be waffling a little bit, right? Like he's addressing that, oh yes, I've come to realize that it exists inside and outside the police service, without specifically referring to Niagara Regional Police Service. Is he playing politics here? Is he afraid that if he, put yourself in his shoes, if he's just appointed as the chief, he's obviously been a deputy chief since 2017, but now he's taken over the top position. If he comes out in one of his first public statements and essentially says, yes, the force is riddled with systemic racism and we need to root out these officers who are doing this and acting in this way and treating our communities this way, he immediately isolates himself, maybe starts a feud with the police union, where in other jurisdictions where they've had these, where they've begun the work of trying to root out systemic racism. And then this is one of the things that inevitably happens. It starts feuds internally. And so maybe he doesn't want to do that. Do you think that could be what's going on here?
The magic words are, there is systemic racism in the Niagara Regional Police Service, and that they have evidence for it. And if he's not saying that, then what's changed from what he said 4 years ago? What's the growth and reflection? There's a long history with the previous chief as well of basically saying things that are not true and white people in power believing them. Let me give you a specific example that has to do with racial profiling. At a St. Catharines City Council meeting, where I'm also, in addition to being in the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association, I'm also chair of the City of St. Catharines Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. And our committee had made some recommendations to City Council to ask of police for some reforms. And one of them was about racial profiling, called, at the time, we referred to it as street checks. So the police chief said to the outgoing police chief, the former police chief, said to the City Council that, oh, we don't do street checks. Their own website showed that there are rules for doing street checks. So I tweeted that during the meeting, and then the next day that page was taken down, and then the day after that page was back up, except they made one change. They took out the word street checks and put collection of identifying information, which is the new word for it. So, I mean, you have a police chief telling City Council we don't do street checks when their own website says they do. And then when I point that out, they take it down and change that one word. So that's I think, typical of what I've seen. Like another one, for example, the previous police chief said that policing is much better in Canada than the United States. But actually, Minneapolis, the police who killed George Floyd, their disparity in use of force against Black people is the same as Niagara's. And the U.S. government has said that's discriminatory and dangerous. But in Niagara, what's the verdict? It's that the police officers are very conservative in their use of force and use restraint. And nobody other than us so far has been questioning them. And other Black organizations have joined in this as well, like Erika's Embrace Support Services and Justice for Black Lives Niagara have also recently endorsed what we're saying.
So those requests, for an apology, for the police service in Niagara to take accountability, to take that first step in terms of admitting that there's a problem. Those requests have been made to the police services board, maybe to regional council to endorse such a request. Have those things happened already and there's just been silence? Or can you kind of run me through that?
Not that specifically. We have a 10-point reform program, and that went through a process where a separate organization, the City of St. Catharines Anti-Racism Advisory Committee, made those recommendations to St. Catharines, and then some of those were endorsed by the council. Then those went to the regional municipality, which is, there's two levels of municipal government in Niagara, unlike some of the other areas nearby. But I know Peel is similarly set up. Then some of those, again, were filtered at the regional council and then went to the police. At each level, we, as the Niagara Region Anti-Racism Association, we communicated on these. So it wasn't just systemic racism, it was specifically drop racial profiling. Like, they haven't even been doing it for 5 years. Why won't they drop it? They say they can't because it's regulated. Well, smoking and drinking is regulated too. That doesn't mean that you can't quit that. We've asked for these specific things, and the police have actually gone backwards. For 2 years at least, we were asking that they give us hate crime data. They said, in this year, 17 hate crimes were committed. They wouldn't tell us when, where, against who. For 2 years, they did that. They met our demands. They gave us details of each crime, who was targeted, what the crime was, where it was. And now they've gone backwards and jumbled it all up so you can't tell. It's all aggregated somewhat. So things are actually getting worse from our specific demands that we've made through various ways and various council meetings at various levels of government.
I look at the new chief's background and where he's policed before. And obviously, him being a deputy chief, he has some level of influence on the chief, but obviously he's not in the top spot. But now with him being in the top spot, he really can implement his vision. And obviously it's he started on the role yesterday, so we can't, it'd be a little bit crazy to think that he's going to come out and express what his vision for reforming the police service is. But where he's worked, the experience that he's had covering and policing diverse communities out in BC, and just the level of experience that he has, put aside the lack of recognition for these very serious issues and the harm that it's causing. If they're able to make that first step, I think, if I was in his shoes, that's what I would be doing immediately. It'd be one of the things on the top of the list, recognizing that there's a problem, acknowledging it, apologizing for it, and then promising that there's going to be a plan coming. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that from him in the near future, I hope. And I imagine both Erika and Saleh, I imagine you both agree that would be a great thing to see. But do you think that the experience that he has could potentially be an asset if it's applied in the proper way? Or are there mechanisms in place that the two of you fear may actually inhibit him from putting forward any progressive vision?
By the way, it's a bit rich that and going into Black History Month is when they hired someone to be police chief who not only denied systemic racism in the police, but doubled down on it when he was challenged by Erika and by our organization on it. So I don't think he's part of the solution and being held back. I think he's part of the problem. And it's not just him, because if you look at the police board, the two regional council representatives, Laura Yip and Pat Giochio, they were among the only regional councillors who backed all of our police reform recommendations. So I was hopeful that, we got the two regional councillors with the best record on police reform as far as our proposals go are getting on the board. Maybe they're going to talk when the use of force against Black people report comes up. And also the vice chair of the board was on the Community Inclusion Council. And I don't know if she's the first Black woman on the board, but the first one I know of. And it's not that her qualifications are because she's Black or she's a woman, but it's important to have that diversity. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. And she also didn't say anything. So in the police board meeting where the use of force against race report was shown, they talked about things like the education qualifications, not one word about the fact that the disproportionate use of force against Black people is out of proportion. And it's 9 times the population and is double what Toronto's disparity is. So it's not just that Chief 40 has had worked with diverse populations, diverse people who've shown respect for diversity on the board, who've done nothing or who said nothing on this anyway, publicly.
I've read his bio. I've read the articles that have been put out boasting about what he has done in the past. But I would like to see what the statistics look like, because they speak volumes for how effective he was actually when he was in those positions. Because as has been mentioned, the statistics here are being ignored and spoken over to kind of just, I feel like, hush the fact that there is problems that need to be addressed. And you can have all of the credentials in the world, but if you're not addressing the needs and supporting your most vulnerable community members, and you don't have statistics to back that up, because that was one of the things that he had said in his open letter, on the radio show, was that there was no proof that systemic racism was existent within the NRPS. I would like to see the proof that change and actual actionable change is going to happen, because you do have the credentials to be making this change. And you are now in a position where you are the head of the organization, and you should be looking at ways that you are going to address the needs of your most vulnerable communities.
If I could just add one example from his own statement to the media responding to us. He explained the racial profiling issue as saying that, well, there's people from out of town. Well, you know what? Guelph's police use of force report has that. For the use of force by race, they say what part was from out of jurisdiction, what part were locals. So you can see that. So if he's saying that that's why you need to take that into account, why doesn't he take that into account? Because if Guelph can do it, why can't Niagara do it? So I think that shows you right there that even his statement is not really it's kind of disingenuous, because if he really cared about that, then he would do what's already being done elsewhere about that specific point.
Additionally, anybody who comes to visit us should be safe as he's saying our community members are. So again, that point in that the statistic is skewed because we have out-of-towners who visit our city or visit our region, it's still showing that there's a problem with that level of brutality from the police.
Yeah, that means nothing. Profiling is profiling if it's someone who lives in Niagara or if they come from outside it, but I don't see what difference that makes. The scary part is that obviously the chief's appointment is going to get a lot of criticism. He's the top cop in Niagara region, and he has a lot of responsibility now on his shoulders. But the scary part is that really the change needs to happen on the front lines as well. So it obviously needs to start at the top. We need someone up there who is willing to accept that there's a problem, view the data in a way that they understand it. I think that obviously with a 35-year career in policing, I would hope that he would have an open mind about what this data shows and what needs to be done. Obviously, he knows what's happening in police forces all surrounding Niagara region. Here in Peel, they're partnered with the Ontario Human Rights Commission to try and solve the anti-Black racism that has plagued that police force for decades. And you'll criticize or comment on how successful you think that has been and how that's going. But at least, there's a recognition that there's a problem. There's steps ahead of where Niagara is. But police forces are not unaware of what is happening within other police jurisdictions. And I think that to keep your head in the sand, I truly believe that, having never spoken to Chief 40 before, I extend an invitation for him to come on this podcast and talk to us about his beliefs on this and where he wants to take the police force. But I don't think, or I would have a hard time seeing someone who has worked in the jurisdictions that he has and the experience in policing that he has, the knowledge about the job that I'm sure that he has, to say now and truly believe that the organization that he worked for does not have a problem with systemic racism. I have a hard time getting over that hurdle. It could be true. If he comes on the podcast and he says that, well, he'll have quite an adversarial interview on his hands. So I think the issue here is, like I said at the beginning, I think we're dealing with a political problem. And I think that is completely abhorrent, because politics should not be getting in the way of dealing with an issue like this that is truly harming people's lives. We're not getting that recognition because there's politics at play right now so early in his appointment. I think in the months to come, we'll see some of these steps that we're talking about right now that need to happen. And whether we see the following steps about what needs to come next, which is that sort of trickle down impact that will see, a vision for moving the police force forward, trickle down to actual change on the front lines, and having officers there that have that trauma informed approach, that realize that they could have unconscious bias that impacts the decisions that they're making. That obviously takes time. That takes that vision that comes down from the top. And obviously that, again, starts with the chief. And so, Saleh and Erika, I throw this out to both of you. What would you like to see happen? Like, obviously, Chief 40 is appointed. He's in the position. I don't think that they're going to change their minds on that. So he's there. He's got the job. What needs to happen next?
I think a first step is acknowledging that systemic racism exists, that your community experiences racism, that there is racism and systemic racism specifically within the NRPS, is a place to start, because acknowledging it would necessitate some sort of change to occur. And I feel like, as a white man, he likely has not been affected by racism or systemic racism, and it can be very easy to be dismissive of it. So I think certainly acknowledging it first and foremost is the first step, and then moving forward with an actual action plan. When I spoke with him on the phone after writing my letter, my open letter in response to his back in 2020, I was invited to be a member of the diversity committee, and I was CC'd on an email to the head of the inclusion committee, and that's where that stopped. So I think following up and actually, whatever the plan is that he comes up with, having an actual plan to execute it and showing that they're taking these steps towards addressing the racism that's existent within the NRPS is imperative.
And to get to your point about the politics also, Joel, I mean, it's the politics of white supremacy, and, we've seen it before. It's not just denial. I mean, it's that, but it's even worse. It's dishonesty. I mean, they have the information there. The 10-point demands that we've made are things that are being done in other cities, and they're demands that have been made long ago by, for example, the African Canadian Legal Clinic after the Washington inquiry. For example, with body cameras, they have money set aside for body cameras, and they said that they're going to wait for a study. And then they said that, we're just going to wait for the province because it doesn't make sense for municipalities to do it individually. In the meanwhile, most of the municipality after municipality is doing these body cameras, which, by the way, Black St. Catharines residents have asked for, including at the St. Catharines City Anti-Racism Advisory Committee. There were delegations made specifically asking for this. So meanwhile, Niagara is being left in the dust under the excuse that we want the province to do it province-wide. Well, it's being done province-wide by municipalities de facto. And the municipalities are saying, we don't even care so much whether the study says this or that. People are demanding it, and so we're going to do it. But not in Niagara. And in fact, even in one of the conference calls the police had with the residents, one resident asked, why aren't you doing the body cams? They had the money set aside. They said, there's not a huge outcry for it. Well, yes, there is. And that's why the other cities are doing it. So, I mean, these are easy things they could do that we've been asking for. That would be just catching up. Just one last thing on that, even with the training you mentioned, it's very difficult to get that information from them, because whenever I ask, the answer I get is, we're doing what's adequate according to the act, which just says, adequate policing, what the chief decides it is. But mathematically, it's impossible for them all the officers to get annual training on these topics, because they do 4 trainings a year and it's 25 people per class. So that doesn't add up. You can't say that everybody is trained annually when you can't even put your full force through the numbers.
Where is the police services board in all of this? If the police services board wanted to make this a priority, making whether it's, like what Erika mentioned as a strategy and action plan for addressing anti-Black racism or systemic racism within the organization, or, to have the chief specifically address this or request an acknowledgement, request an apology, the police services board could put that through or try and add pressure to this. Where are they in all of this?
Well, by the Police Act, the police chief has full operational control. The board only has oversight on policies. But this has been an issue now in many other police boards in Ontario. Even in some cities, they're not even allowing or really giving full delegation rights. I think that's in Ottawa. This is a struggle or a conflict that's been going on in other places. Haven't seen anything like that here. In fact, at the Niagara Regional Council meeting in 2020, where reforms were brought up, Councillor Laura Yip, who's now on the police board, had done a very good job of insisting on the former police chief answering why they don't drop racial profiling that they could. He kept dodging the question, and she kept asking him, and on her fourth try, she got it. But then in the Niagara Regional Police Board meeting, the same thing came up, and she herself admitted in the meeting that she wasn't able to do what she did in the Regional Council meeting before she was on the police board on the same question. And the police were saying what they always say, that racial profiling under the old name is a terrible thing. We would never do it. But under the new name, it's absolutely necessary. But they haven't been doing it, and it didn't yield arrest anyway when they did it. Not that that's a justification. So why can't they just drop it? So even these little things they haven't been able to, the board hasn't been able to do. So I don't see how they're going to do the big things, but we need to keep asking them, telling them to.
So it seems like there's a pretty significant issue with transparency here, both around steps moving forward, but also just basic data and training and these sorts of things that Saleh, you were mentioning, that it's almost like pulling teeth trying to get any information out of them.
Yeah, I mean, and you can see even the person I'm talking to may want to give the information, but somebody higher up is telling them not to. Even I talked with the police's analyst. He was giving me information. At one point, he said, well, I've been told I can't give you any more information. You have to do a freedom of information request. I never do a freedom of information request unless I know that information is there, because it's often a waste of time unless you know exactly, that it exists and that it will lead somewhere. Other times, it goes to a senior police official who gives me a non-answer, the typical non-answer you get all the time, that we're doing what the law says we need to do, which is whatever they decide it is. And if they're really interested in, like you said, transparency or change, then they would be open about exactly what they're doing.
Additionally, I feel like if they're willing to be transparent, body cameras wouldn't be an issue. And they can't scapegoat to a lack of funding, because the funding's there. It just needs to be put in place. And as was mentioned, communities would feel safer if they knew they had actual footage of what the police were doing. And it could be used for both parties, for the police to prove their point, for the community to prove their point. I'll never forget being so upset that I didn't take my cell phone out sooner when I was downtown St. Catharines, and a Black man was being arrested, and he was already cuffed, and a young police officer, the man was already being held down by two people, and a young police officer came up and gave him repeated shots to the ribs when nobody was in danger. He was already detained, and I got the end footage of the man being arrested and the police officer, but there was no actual video proof of the act that he just committed right in front of my eyes. And I feel like if we had cameras to prove that there is an excessive use of force being used, we would all feel a lot safer. And I think it's one of the points that just needs to be addressed, and it could be something that is easily put in place now that 40's in the position of making that decision.
And if I could just add quickly, Erika's video is available, by the way, on our socials at the NRARA on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. You have to go back a bit, but it's there. And also there was an Indigenous man who was beaten up by the police. We helped delegate to regional council. And what it came down to with the Special Investigation Unit report on him, somebody else who had said that he should file a complaint, it became the Indigenous man's word against the officer's word. Well, if they had body cameras, exactly like Erika said, then we wouldn't need to get down to where the Special Investigations Unit report says, well, we have to believe the officer. And then the Niagara Regional Police put that Special Investigations Unit report in their information, which they don't always do, and as a way to kind of rebut his delegation to the regional council, where he's giving his first-hand testimony and he's not being believed, basically. And exactly like Erika said, instead of having us being required to take videos, that it could be on the police themselves.
Yeah, I think with body cameras in those sorts of circumstances, I believe it's only a matter of time before every officer in Ontario, if not the country, is outfitted with one of these cameras. I think that's the way of the future. A lot of police forces, the big ones in Canada, have already adopted body-worn cameras, and I think it's only a matter of time before they start to appear in other police forces, smaller, big and large. But I think that's a good place to leave it for today. I want to thank both Erika and Saleh for joining me, both of them from the Niagara Anti-Racism Association. And to all of you listening, thank you so much for being here. And I hope you'll return next week for another episode of Ballot Vox.
Ballot Vox was hosted by Joel Whitnable, produced by me. Join us next week for the Pointer's ongoing coverage of the issues on the ballot. I'm Jeff Chalmers. Thank you for listening. Talk to you soon.